Hey, Richard Bryce here. In this video, I'm going to be explaining the differences between a straight arm and a bent arm forehand, other than the obvious that one of them's got a straight arm and one of them's got a bent arm. But I'm going to be explaining why it's different and how it relates to the racket lag, because it's really important. And I'm also going to give you some thoughts on which one that maybe you should go for that you might not have heard before. So I hope you enjoy the video. Hope you find it interesting. If you do, it'd be great if you could let me know by giving me a thumbs up. If you get any questions, feel free, ask them down below. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel before, it'd be great if you could do that too. Okay, so other than the obvious, what's the difference between the straight arm and the bent arm forehand? And probably more importantly, which one should you be using? I'm going to give you my thoughts on this. Hopefully I'll be able to explain things in a certain way and mention a couple of points that you might not have heard before that could factor into your decision. So the main difference here is going to be the way that you create racket lag and the way that you create topspin. So the contribution of different body movements to both of those elements of the forehand. Now, for the straight arm forehand, the contact point needs to be a little bit further away, so you have to be further away from the ball, and the contact point has to be a little bit further in front. For the bent arm, the contact point is going to be a little bit closer, and you can afford to have it a little bit further back. And I think that's actually maybe a big factor, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. So in terms of generating the racket lag and the topspin, you know that we're going to start from the unit turn. So for efficient biomechanics, we've got to get that body side on. We're going to get our pelvis side on. So if we're hitting from a neutral stance, it'll be more like that. If we're hitting from an open stance, we'll still be coming from there. But it's all about driving from the hip, then the torso comes through, then the arm comes through, and then the wrist and the racket follow through or come through to the contact point, and then there's the follow through. So the differences lie in how you create that racket lag. For the straight arm forehand, I've got a straight arm. That racket lag mostly happens very passively, and it's all shoulder external rotation. So this is my shoulder joint, this is external rotation. So as I drive my hip forwards, my torso pulls, my arm pulls forwards, and as my arm pulls forwards, so it's like a simultaneous thing, because I'm pulling on this end of the racket just drops down. So that's what creates the external rotation, and then I've already got this forwards movement, and it turns things into a whip that brings the racket through. So we've got the external rotation of the shoulder there. Now most of the topspin is going to come from that internal rotation. So internally rotating there to create the topspin. There's obviously a little bit of a contribution coming from my shoulder moving upwards, and if I'm straightening my legs, that's going to create a tiny amount of topspin, but most of it is this shoulder internal rotation. So that's kind of the key feature of the straight arm forehand, where we're going to be creating all of that topspin with internal shoulder rotation. The bent arm forehand is a little bit different, because instead of just shoulder external rotation creating this racket lag, we've now got wrist or forearm supination, so this movement. So as I drive from the hip, I've now got the shoulder and the wrist and the forearm taking my racket back into that position, and then it's the same. The hips driven, the torso, the shoulder, and now when we get to here, instead of just internal rotation, because that wouldn't give us everything we need with a bent arm, we've got some forearm pronation, so this movement as well, to create the topspin. So the difference is you've now got this kind of motion, and then the topspin comes from the shoulder internal rotation and the forearm pronation into the follow through. So there, the key differences. The question is, which one should you be using? And I've watched a bunch of different videos on this, and I've heard a lot of different thoughts. You know, one school of thought and set of arguments is most professional tennis players have a bent arm. So that's the one that you should go for, because statistically, you've got more chance of becoming a professional tennis player if you go for a bent arm. But I'm going to argue a little bit differently, because Federer and Nadal both have a straight arm, and Djokovic has a bent arm, but it's nowhere near as bent as a lot of the other players. So what I'm thinking, when you model anything, you want to model the absolute best to kind of get the best possible result. It's just the same for every aspect of life, and it's the same in sports. So when you're modeling the best, we've got to look at the best players. Now, there's a lot of fantastic forehands out there, but most players come and go. You know, players have a career, they win maybe, you know, some tournaments or whatever, and then they get injured, and then they're gone. Whereas Federer And Nadal, 20 Grand Slams each, still going straight arm structure. Djokovic, mostly straight arm structure, 20 Grand Slams. And potentially, the way that they hit their forehand is a big part, or at least part of the reason they haven't received the same amount of injuries as other players. So this is purely the way I think about it, but I think it's kind of a key piece that you should consider with what's going on with you. I also don't necessarily think other professional tennis players intentionally went, right, we're going to choose a bent arm structure. I believe that it probably happened at a younger age, and just because they were maybe a little bit closer to the ball, so just the way it worked out and the way that they made their timing work, they kind of maximized what they were doing with their contact point being a little bit closer, and because of that they evolved into having this bent arm. Again, that's purely me speculating and thinking through this. I can't prove this, or I couldn't prove this without chatting to everyone's coach and asking them what they did when they were 5 and 6 years old, but that's the way I would think about it. But the key piece for all of this is going to be timing. So at the end of the day, you're going to choose the one that you can make work with your timing. And that's, I guess Daniil Medvedev is the best example of this. A very bent arm, but what a forehand, because he's got unbelievable timing with that bent arm structure. Keeps his head really still. I'm just going to throw that one in there as a key thing that you also want to be focusing on. But it's about whether you can make the timing work. So although in theory, I would say, maybe a straight arm is the one to go for based on my understanding of the biomechanics and that thought process. But at the end of the day, it's whatever one you can make the timing work for, because timing is the king when it comes to developing a high-level forehand, so that has to be the priority. Now, I've made other videos that go into detail on the timing. I'll place a link to one of them down in the description, but I just really want to quickly mention something that I've got for you to help you with this. Because a big part of timing is your ability to predict how fast the ball's coming and how far the ball is away, so you can start your swing at the right speed and so that you can swing at the correct speed based on the ball that's coming towards you. A lot of that comes down to how your visual system is functioning. These amazing tennis players we see on TV, they have amazing visual systems. But unfortunately, a lot of adult tennis players don't have a visual system that functions like that, and it really creates problems for their timing and means that whether they try the straight arm or try the bent arm, it doesn't work quite like they should. So I've created a free program to help you train your vision, because it's very trainable. I'll place a link down there, and I'll place a link up there so you can grab hold of that. Okay, they're my thoughts on the bent and straight arm forehand. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Did you learn something from this? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What do you use? Leave your comments down below. I look forward to reading them.